This 4-year-old beggar girl is beaten with a stick in the street to learn not to steal, but a millionaire hears the screams and something happens. Comment on what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scream tore through the crisp afternoon air in upstate New York like a blade, echoing off the brownstones of Main Street. Arthur Davenport stopped abruptly, his measured steps interrupted by the desperate sound coming from the alley between O'Malley's pub and the old bookstore. At 58, the businessman had learned to ignore most urban noises, but this one had something different, an urgency that made his stomach clench. He hesitated for a moment, adjusting his wool coat against the chilly autumn wind. His business awaited him, an important meeting scheduled for 5 o'clock. But the scream repeated, weaker now, laden with a pain that seemed to come from much deeper than any physical wound. Arthur turned toward the alley, his Italian loafers echoing on the uneven pavement. What he saw left him frozen for a few precious seconds. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, was huddled against the damp wall while a thin, dirty man gesticulated wildly above her. "You little brat! Where's my sandwich? I saw you take it." The man held a piece of wood, threatening the child who trembled with cold and fear. "I didn't take anything, mister. I was just looking." The girl's voice was small, almost a whisper, but filled with a sincerity that cut Arthur to the heart. The child was in rags. Her clothes, which may once have been colorful, were now just dirty, torn patches. Her dark hair was tangled, her thin face stained with dirt and tears. But it was her eyes that struck Arthur, large, dark, full of an intelligence that didn't match her desperate situation. "Hey!" Arthur's voice came out louder than he intended, laden with an authority he had developed over decades running companies. "Get away from her now!" The man turned, quickly assessing the well-dressed businessman. For a moment, it seemed he would flee, but hunger and desperation made him more reckless. "This ain't your business, fancy pants. This kid's a thief." Arthur took a step forward, his intimidating height filling the narrow alley. "I said, get away. I'm not going to repeat myself." There was something in his voice, a controlled coldness that promised consequences, that made the man hesitate. Arthur had developed this presence over the years, learning that sometimes the right words, said the right way, were worth more than any show of force. "She stole my sandwich," insisted the man, but already backing away slightly. "How much was the sandwich?" Arthur pulled his wallet from the inside pocket of his coat, his movements deliberate and calm. $5, but that ain't the point. Here's 10. Arthur held out the bill, keeping his eyes fixed on the man. "Now get lost." And the man took the money with trembling hands, cast one last angry look at the girl, and disappeared through the opposite end of the alley, muttering curses that were lost in the distance. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the child's ragged breathing. Arthur crouched down slowly, getting to her eye level. Up close, he could better see her condition. She was clearly malnourished, her thin arms marked by small scratches and old bruises. And the way she was protecting her right arm suggested some pain. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. "Isis," she replied, wiping her nose on the back of her dirty hand. "Isis? That's a pretty name." Arthur noticed how she flinched when he got closer. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but he could see that wasn't entirely true. There were marks of recent falls on her knees, and the way she favored her right arm suggested some pain. "Where are your parents, Isis?" The girl's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't have a daddy, and Mommy's gone." "Gone where?" "I don't know. She said she'd be back, but that was a long time ago." Isis wiped her hand across her eyes, smearing even more dirt across her face. "I live on the streets now." Arthur felt something tighten in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. Throughout his adult life, he had maintained emotional distance from people, especially children. After the loss of his wife Lucinda 5 years ago, he had closed himself off even more, focusing all his energy on business. But there was something about this girl that disarmed his defenses. Maybe it was the dignity with which she faced an impossible situation for someone her age, or the intelligence that shone in her eyes despite the fear. "How long have you been on the streets?" "A long time. Since I got this big." Isis raised her hand, indicating a height smaller than her current one. "Mrs. Gable said it's been 2 years, but I can't count right yet." 2 years. A 6-year-old child had survived on the streets of upstate New York for 2 years. Arthur stood up, watching the movement of people on Main Street. The area was relatively safe, but still. How had no one noticed? How had such a small child gone unnoticed for so long? "Are you hungry?" he asked. Isis nodded vigorously, her eyes lighting up with a cautious hope. "Come with me, then. Let's get you something to eat." But when he extended his hand, Isis recoiled instinctively. Arthur realized that he would only gain her trust with patience, something that, ironically, had never been his greatest virtue. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his hand outstretched. "I promise." After a few seconds that seemed like eternity, Isis lightly touched his fingers. Her hand was small, cold and rough, hands that had known too much work and suffering for a child. As they walked toward the town center, Arthur wondered what exactly he was doing. He wasn't a man of impulses, much less of humanitarian gestures. His life was structured, controlled, predictable, but something about this girl had awakened a protective instinct that he didn't even know he possessed. What he couldn't imagine was that this seemingly casual encounter would completely change the course of his orderly life, bringing to light secrets that had been buried for years and revelations that would shake everything he thought he knew about his past. As they crossed the main square, with its leafy trees and historic buildings, an elderly woman watched them from a window on the second floor of a brownstone. Estella Monroe, at 67, had seen many things in her long life, but something about that scene made her uneasy. She had recognized the girl, and that meant secrets kept for years were about to come to light. Arthur Davenport's mansion stood majestically on the outskirts of town, surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens where blue hydrangeas contrasted with the light stone of the colonial construction. When the electronic gate opened, Isis squeezed Arthur's hand more tightly, her eyes wide with the grandeur that unfolded before her. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her small voice echoing inside the car. "It is. And you're going to stay here for a while until we figure out what to do." During the drive, Arthur had bought children's clothes at a store downtown, watching Isis carefully choose a pink blouse with small embroidered flowers. The girl had held the piece as if it were a treasure, running her fingers delicately over the clean fabric. Now, standing in front of his own house, Arthur questioned the wisdom of his decision. He knew nothing about caring for children. His life was governed by precise routines, scheduled meetings, and silence. What would he do with a 6-year-old girl who had grown up on the streets? The front door opened even before they reached the marble steps. Carmen Estrella appeared in the doorway, her severe expression intensified by her rigid posture. At 45, she had dedicated the last 15 years to keeping Arthur's house running like a Swiss watch, and changes were not in her vocabulary. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes quickly scanning Isis from head to toe. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Carmen, this is Isis. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The housekeeper raised an eyebrow, noting the girl's state despite the new clothes. "Staying? For how long?" "I don't know yet." Isis hid behind Arthur, intimidated by the woman who was watching her with obvious distrust. Carmen had seen many people try to take advantage of her employer's generosity over the years, and a street child could just be a more elaborate version of the usual scams. "She needs a bath and food," said Arthur, ignoring Carmen's disapproving look. "Prepare the guest room on the second floor." "Sir, perhaps we should think more carefully about this. An unknown child." "Carmen." Arthur's voice carried the tone he used in business meetings when he wouldn't accept arguments. "Prepare the room." The housekeeper nodded rigidly and walked away, but Arthur could feel her resistance. He had known Carmen long enough to know that she wouldn't abandon her suspicions easily. "Come on, Isis. I'll show you where you're going to sleep." The girl followed him up the grand wooden staircase, her silent steps contrasting with the echo of Arthur's shoes. The room he chose was large, with a window overlooking the gardens and the mountains in the distance. The bed was too big for her, but the clean white sheets seemed like paradise after 2 years sleeping outdoors. "Is this mine?" asked Isis, touching the cotton quilt with reverence. "It's yours while you're here." For the first time since he met her, Arthur saw Isis smile genuinely. It was a smile that completely transformed her face, revealing a child who had learned to hide her joy in order to survive. "Carmen is going to bring you hot water for a bath. Then we can have dinner." An hour later, when Isis came down to the dining room, Arthur barely recognized her. Clean and wearing the new clothes, she revealed delicate features that the dirt had masked. Her hair, now washed, fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with a vibrancy that contrasted dramatically with the frightened child from the alley. Carmen had prepared a simple dinner: vegetable soup, fresh bread, and fruit. Isis ate slowly, clearly trying to control herself from devouring everything at once. Arthur watched fascinated as she held the utensils, demonstrating a basic education that surprised someone who had lived on the streets. "Who taught you how to use a fork and knife?" he asked. "My mom. She said I had to be a polite girl." Isis's eyes filled with sadness. "Before she got sick." "Sick how?" Isis stirred her soup, searching for the words. "She used to get really weird. Sometimes she wouldn't recognize me. Sometimes she'd cry all day, and then she started leaving home and not coming back for days." Arthur exchanged a look with Carmen, who had stopped organizing the dishes to listen. "Substance abuse," he concluded. Isis's mother had developed some kind of addiction that led her to abandon her daughter. "What was your mother's name?" Valdira Santos." Carmen dropped a cup, which shattered on the stone floor. Everyone turned to her, who was as pale as paper. "I'm sorry," she muttered, bending down to collect the shards. It was an accident, but Arthur knew his housekeeper too well. That hadn't been a casual reaction. Carmen knew that name, and for some reason, it had shaken her. After dinner, while Isis carefully explored the living room, marveling at the books and art objects, Arthur confronted Carmen in the kitchen. "You know Valdira Santos." It wasn't a question. Carmen stopped washing the dishes, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Davenport." "Don't lie to me, Carmen. I saw your reaction." The housekeeper dried her hands on her apron, avoiding his gaze. "I knew a Valdira years ago. She worked at St. Teresa's Hospital." "A nurse?" "Yes. She was very good at what she did, dedicated, caring for the patients." Carmen hesitated, but she started having problems. First it was sleeping pills, then it was other things. She lost her job, her house. I heard she had a daughter, but no one knew what had happened to her. Arthur processed the information: a nurse who had fallen into addiction and lost everything, including her daughter. But something didn't fit. "What period did she work at the hospital?" "About 5-6 years ago." "Why?" Before Arthur could answer, Isis appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding an art book she had taken from the shelf. "Can I take this to the room? It has very pretty drawings." "Of course," said Arthur, watching as she flipped through the pages with extreme care. "Thank you. Good night, Mr. Davenport. Good night, Mrs. Estrella." After she went upstairs, Carmen turned to Arthur with a worried expression. "Sir, don't you think you should contact the authorities? An abandoned child? We'll think about that tomorrow. Today she just needs to sleep safely." But when Arthur went up to check if Isis was okay, he found something that disturbed him. The girl had fallen asleep with the book open in her lap, but there was something different. On a sheet of paper she had found somewhere, she had drawn. The drawing showed a long-haired woman in a white room, crying. The strokes were surprisingly accurate for a 6-year-old child, but what stood out most was the expression of deep sadness she had managed to capture. Arthur watched the drawing for a long time, a strange feeling growing in his chest. There was something familiar in that image, something that stirred memories he preferred to keep buried. He put away the drawing and turned off the light, but it took him hours to fall asleep. Outside, the light rain typical of upstate New York began to fall, creating a soft melody against the windows of the mansion. On the other side of town, in a window of the brownstone, Estella Monroe also remained awake, watching the rain and thinking about the child she had seen with Arthur Davenport. There were difficult decisions ahead, secrets that maybe it was time to reveal. But not yet. It wasn't the right moment yet. The first rays of sun that crossed the lace curtains found Isis already awake, sitting at the window of the room, watching the gardens of the mansion. It was still very early, but she had developed the habit of waking up at dawn during her years on the streets, a survival instinct that wouldn't disappear easily. Arthur found her like that when he came to check how she had slept, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The girl was quiet, almost still, but her eyes captured every detail of the world unfolding outside. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "Yes, sir. The bed is very soft." Isis turned to him, and Arthur noticed that she had dressed herself, carefully choosing one of the new clothes. "Can I draw the little birds I see in the garden?" "Of course. I'll ask Carmen to bring paper and pencils." During breakfast, Arthur watched Isis with growing fascination. The girl ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a banquet, but at the same time demonstrating a table manners that surprised. Her questions were intelligent, her observations too perceptive for someone her age. "What do you do for work?" she asked, after finishing her toast. "I have businesses. I build buildings, houses, shopping malls, like the ones I saw when I lived on the street." "Maybe some of them, yes." Isis nodded thoughtfully. "It must be hard to make such big houses." "I only knew how to make small houses with pieces of wood I found." The naturalness with which she spoke about her previous life moved Arthur. There was no self-pity, just an acceptance too mature for her 6 years. Carmen entered the room at that moment, bringing paper and crayons as Arthur had requested. Her expression still showed skepticism, but there was something softer in her eyes when she looked at Isis. "Here are the drawing materials," she said, placing everything on the table. "But be careful not to get anything dirty." "Thank you, Mrs. Estrella. I'll be very careful." After Arthur left for work, something he did with unprecedented reluctance, Isis settled on the back porch of the house, from where she had a perfect view of the gardens. What happened in the following hours left Carmen deeply disturbed. The girl didn't just draw the birds she saw. On sheet after sheet, she reproduced with impressive accuracy details of the property that she shouldn't have known, the exact shape of the stones that decorated the fountain, the specific arrangement of the rose bushes in the farthest corner of the garden, even the small wooden bridge over the creek that ran at the back of the property, an area that was not visible from the porch where she was. When Carmen approached to see the drawings, she felt a chill run down her spine. How could a child who had never been there know these details? "Isis," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral, "these drawings are very beautiful. How did you know there was a bridge back there?" The girl raised her eyes from the papers, a confused expression crossing her face. I don't know. I think I dreamed about it." "Dreamed?" "Sometimes I dream about beautiful places, about gardens and big houses, and about a long-haired lady who is sad in those places." Carmen felt her heart race. "What lady?" "She wears white dresses and is looking out the window, but she is always crying." Isis went back to drawing, as if she were describing something perfectly normal. Sometimes she sings a sad song. The housekeeper needed to lean on the porch railing. She knew that description. She knew it very well. The rest of the morning passed in growing tension. Carmen watched Isis from afar, noting other disturbing details. The way the girl walked through the corridors of the house as if she already knew them, how she instinctively knew where the bathroom, the kitchen, even Arthur's office were, without ever having been shown to her. When Arthur returned for lunch, another unprecedented break in his routine, Carmen was waiting for him with a tense expression. "I need to talk to you. Alone." They retreated to the office, while Isis remained in the living room, leafing through a book of old photographs of upstate New York that she had found on the shelf. "What's going on, Carmen?" "That girl, Mr. Davenport. There's something very strange about her." Carmen recounted the impossible drawings, the descriptions of the woman in white, the strange familiarity with which Isis moved around the house. Arthur listened in silence, a somber expression forming on his face. "You think she's been here before?" "I don't know what to think, but—" Carmen hesitated, clearly struggling with something. "Sir, the description she made of the lady in white—" "What about it?" "It's exactly like your wife, like Lucinda." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Arthur stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the gardens, where his late wife used to spend her afternoons. "That's impossible, Carmen. Lucinda has been gone for 5 years. Isis never knew her. I know it seems impossible, but nothing." Arthur turned around, his voice laden with a firmness he didn't feel. "They're just coincidences. The girl has a very active imagination, that's all." But when they returned to the living room, they found Isis standing in front of a specific photograph on the shelf, a portrait of Lucinda in the garden, smiling amidst the blue hydrangeas. The girl looked at the image with a disturbing intensity, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Isis?" Arthur approached slowly. "What are you looking at?" "It's her," whispered the girl, touching the glass of the frame with reverence. "The lady from my dreams. She's always sad, but here she's smiling." Arthur felt the world spin around him. You know this lady?" "I do. She visits me at night when I'm sleeping. She tells me that one day I would find a house where I would be happy." Isis turned to Arthur, her eyes big and sincere. "I think this is the house she was talking about." Carmen covered her mouth with her hands, visibly paling. Arthur knelt before Isis, his hands trembling slightly. "Isis, this lady, what else did she tell you in your dreams?" "That she had to go away, but that one day someone very good would take care of me. Someone who would love me like she couldn't." The girl smiled innocently. "I think it was you she was talking about, Mr. Davenport." At that moment, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. Carmen went to answer, still shaken by what she had just witnessed. When she returned, she brought with her an elderly woman whom Arthur vaguely recognized as one of the neighbors in town. "Mr. Davenport," said the woman, removing the hat that protected her gray hair, "my name is Estella Monroe. I really need to talk to you about the girl you found yesterday." Arthur felt a chill in his stomach. "What do you mean?" Estella looked at Isis, who had hidden behind Arthur at the sight of the stranger, and then returned her eyes to the businessman. There was something in her expression that promised even more disturbing revelations. "I knew Valdira Santos very well. We were close friends before everything went wrong." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And there are things about this child that you need to know. Things that Valdira told me before she disappeared." "What kind of things?" Estella looked again at Isis, then at the photograph of Lucinda that was still on the table in the living room. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets kept for a long time. "Isis is not Valdira's biological daughter, Mr. Davenport. She was, let's say, entrusted to her care when she was still a baby, by someone who couldn't raise her." Arthur's world seemed to crumble once more. "By whom?" "By a woman who was desperate, who knew she was going to leave and needed to make sure her daughter would be safe." Estella picked up the photograph of Lucinda, her eyes filling with tears. "By a woman who loved you too much to burden you with a truth that could destroy you both." Estella Monroe's words echoed through the silence of the room like stones thrown into a calm lake. creating waves that spread in all directions. Arthur remained motionless for long seconds, processing what he had just heard, while Isis clung to his leg, clearly frightened by the tension that had taken over the environment. "That's impossible," he murmured finally, his voice hoarse. "Lucinda she never had children. We tried for years, but she did, yes." Estella sat down heavily in the armchair, as if the weight of the secrets she carried were physical. 6 years ago, Lucinda sought out Valdira at the hospital. She was pregnant and desperate. Carmen, who had remained standing near the door, took a step forward. "Pregnant? But why didn't she tell Mr. Davenport?" Estella's eyes filled with a deep sadness. "Because the child wasn't his." The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur felt as if the ground had disappeared under his feet. Isis, sensing the change in his behavior, held him tighter, her big dark eyes searching his face for reassurance. "Lucinda had had a moment of weakness," continued Estella, choosing her words carefully. "You were going through difficulties in your marriage, arguing a lot about the impossibility of having children. She felt alone, and, well, it happened." Arthur moved away from Isis and walked to the window, his hands trembling visibly. 5 years after Lucinda's departure, discovering that she had betrayed him and become pregnant by another man was like receiving a stab in the heart that had already healed with so much effort. "Why didn't she tell me? Why did she lie?" "Because she loved you," said Estella simply. "And because she knew that you would never accept raising another man's child. Lucinda told me that she would rather die than see your marriage destroyed by her mistake." So she gave the child to Valdira?" Valdira was desperate for money. Her addiction had started after a work accident, when she became addicted to pain medication. Lucinda offered to pay for her treatment in exchange for taking care of the baby temporarily. Isis, who had listened to everything in silence, approached the photograph of Lucinda again. With her childish innocence, she touched the woman's face in the image and whispered, "Why didn't you want me, Mommy?" The girl's words were like a punch to the stomach of everyone present. Estella began to cry openly, while Carmen covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "She wanted you, my dear," said Estella, extending her arms to Isis. "She wanted you very much, but she was very sick and knew she couldn't take care of you." "Sick like Valdira?" "Different. Lucinda was sick at heart, very sad. And when you get very sad for a long time, sometimes the body stops working properly." Arthur turned abruptly. "Are you saying that that she didn't die of natural causes?" Estella hesitated, clearly struggling with more secrets. "She was taking very strong medication to be able to deal with the guilt of having abandoned Isis. In the end, she took too much medication." The revelation fell like a hammer. Lucinda had taken her own life, consumed by the guilt of having abandoned her daughter and lied to her husband. Arthur leaned against the wall, feeling completely lost. "But wait," said Carmen, trying to understand. "If Valdira was being paid to take care of Isis, why did she abandon the girl?" "Because the money ran out when Lucinda was gone," explained Estella, "and Valdira, without the resources for treatment, plunged into addiction. She tried to continue taking care of Isis for a while, but the addiction was stronger." Isis had sat down on the floor, hugging her legs and rocking gently, a behavior that Arthur had already noticed when she became anxious. The girl began to hum softly a sad melody that made everyone in the room freeze. "Where did you learn that song?" asked Estella, her voice whispering. "The lady in white sings it to me in my dreams. She said it was the song she sang to put me to sleep when I was little." Estella turned to Arthur, tears streaming down her face. "It was Lucinda's favorite song. She always sang it." At that moment, something broke inside Arthur. All the anger, all the confusion, all the pain of the last 5 years mixed with a new reality impossible to ignore. Looking at Isis, He saw for the first time traits that he had ignored before, the shape of her eyes, the delicate line of her chin, even the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. "My God," he whispered, "she really is." "Lucinda's daughter," confirmed Estella. "And now, after so much suffering, you have found each other." But Arthur was struggling with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, Isis was the daughter of the woman he had loved. On the other, she was also the result of the betrayal that had destroyed his marriage and indirectly caused Lucinda's death. I need to think," he said, moving away when Isis tried to approach. "This is too much." The rejection in his eyes made Isis recoil, confused and hurt. The girl didn't understand why the man who had been so kind to her suddenly seemed scared by her presence. "Uncle Arthur," she said in her small voice, "did I do something wrong?" The word uncle hit Arthur like an arrow. Isis had started calling him that naturally, creating a bond that was now becoming too complicated for him to process. Estella stood up, realizing that she needed to give Arthur time to absorb everything. "I'm going to let you talk, but Mr. Davenport, there is one thing that Valdira asked me to deliver if I ever found Isis." She took from her bag a small golden key, old and delicate. "Valdira said that this key opened something important that Lucinda had left for her daughter, something that would explain everything." "What does the key open?" "I don't know. Valdira was very confused when she gave it to me, talking about a safe place where Lucinda kept her most precious things." Carmen took the key, examining it with curiosity. "It seems to be from a safe or small chest." "Lucinda had a safe deposit box at the bank," murmured Arthur, suddenly remembering. "I never knew what was in there. She said it was just personal keepsakes." While the adults talked, Isis had retreated to a corner of the room, hugging one of the books she had leafed through earlier. The girl clearly felt the change in Arthur's behavior, and her expression reflected the confusion and fear of being abandoned again. "Mr. Davenport," said Carmen softly, "look at her. See how scared she is." Arthur looked at Isis and felt his heart clench. The girl seemed so small and vulnerable, trying to hide behind the book as if she could disappear. Regardless of who her biological father was, she was just a child who had suffered abandonment after abandonment. "Isis," he said, approaching slowly and kneeling before her, "you didn't do anything wrong. Adults sometimes get confused with things, complicated things." "You don't want me to stay here anymore?" she asked, her voice trembling. Arthur looked into the girl's eyes that he now recognized as a child's version of Lucinda's eyes, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I do. Very much." He hugged her, feeling her melt into his arms. "No matter what we discover, you will always have a place here with me." But even as he comforted Isis, Arthur knew that the journey was just beginning. The key in Carmen's hands promised to reveal more secrets, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for what they might discover. Outside, the clouds were gathering over the mountains of upstate New York, promising another rainy afternoon. And somewhere in town, Valdira Santos was looking out the window of a rehab clinic, wondering if she had done the right thing in entrusting Lucinda's secrets to Estella. The days following Estella's visit passed in a tense atmosphere, charged with unspoken words. Arthur alternated between moments of genuine affection with Isis and periods of distance, when the weight of the revelations became too suffocating. The girl, with her keen sensitivity, perceived every mood swing, every hesitation, every look that carried more doubts than certainties. Carmen watched everything with growing concern. She had developed an unexpected affection for Isis, who helped her with household chores with touching enthusiasm and a gratitude that broke her heart. The child was different from any other she had known. There was in her a premature maturity mixed with a pure innocence that made her irresistible. "Mrs. Estrella," said Isis one Thursday morning, while helping her fold the washed clothes, "is Uncle Arthur mad at me?" The direct question caught Carmen off guard. "Why do you think that, honey?" Sometimes he looks at me and gets very sad, and when I ask if I can sit with him to read, he says he's busy. Isis carefully folded a t-shirt, her movements too precise for a 6-year-old. On the street, when people got like that, it was because they were going to send me away. Carmen felt her heart clench. No one is going to send you away, Isis. Uncle Arthur is just processing some difficult things he's found out. About me? The brutal honesty of the question forced Carmen to be equally direct. About your family. About things that happened before you were born. Isis nodded with a seriousness that didn't match her age. The lady in white is also sad when she appears in my dreams now. Before she just cried, but now she seems haunted. Haunted. Like she did something very bad and doesn't know how to fix it. Carmen stopped folding the clothes, a chill running down her spine. Isis's dreams about Lucinda had intensified since Estella's visit, becoming more vivid and disturbing. The girl woke up many nights crying, muttering about the lady in white, who asked for forgiveness for something she couldn't explain. That afternoon, while Isis was drawing in the garden, Arthur finally made the decision he had been postponing for days. He took the key that Estella had left and headed to the bank where Lucinda kept her private safe deposit box. The manager, Mr. Harrison, greeted him with the usual deference, but his eyes showed curiosity when Arthur explained that he needed to access his late wife's box with a key he had found. Mr. Davenport, the box was sealed after Mrs. Lucinda's passing, only with a court order. This is the original key, interrupted Arthur, showing the small golden key, and I am the sole legal heir. Don't. After some checks and calls, Arthur found himself in front of the small stainless steel box that held his wife's final secrets. His hands trembled when he inserted the key into the lock. What he found inside completely changed his understanding of everything that had happened. There were photographs, dozens of them, baby Isis in Lucinda's arms, Isis taking her first steps in an apartment that Arthur didn't recognize, Isis playing with toys he had never seen. The photos told the story of a mother who had secretly followed every important moment of her daughter's life. But it wasn't just photographs. There were letters, pages and pages, written in Lucinda's familiar handwriting, all addressed to Isis to be read when she grew up. With trembling hands, Arthur opened the first letter. My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it means that you have finally discovered the truth about who you are. I know you must be confused, maybe even angry, and I understand completely. I made terrible decisions that hurt many people, especially you. Lucinda's voice seemed to echo through the words, and Arthur had to stop several times to control his emotion. Your biological father is named Edward Miller. He was a doctor at the hospital where Valdira worked. Our relationship was brief and born out of my despair at not being able to get pregnant by Arthur. When I found out I was pregnant, Edward had already moved to another state with his family. I decided not to tell him about you because I realized I had made a terrible mistake. But you, my little one, were not a mistake. You were a gift I didn't deserve. Arthur interrupted his reading, feeling suffocated by the intensity of the emotions. Lucinda had planned everything meticulously, documenting every decision, every moment of doubt. In the second letter, dated a few months later, Arthur still doesn't know about you, and I don't have the courage to tell him. He wants so much to have children, but I know he would never accept raising another man's daughter. I would rather die than see the hatred in his eyes when he discovers my betrayal. Valdira has agreed to take care of you temporarily. I pay for her treatment and a monthly amount. I visit you every week, pretending to be just a visitor interested in helping children in need. The third letter was more recent, written just weeks before Lucinda's death. My health is getting worse, and I know I don't have much time. The weight of the lie is consuming me. I have left instructions that if something happens to me, Valdira should take you back to Arthur. He is a good man, despite everything. I know he will take care of you when he understands that you are innocent of your mother's sins. But it was the last letter that completely destroyed Arthur's emotional defenses. Isis, my beloved daughter, if one day you read these words, know that every day away from you was an agony. I watched you grow up from afar, saw your first steps, your first words, your beautiful drawings. You have an artistic talent that leaves me amazed. But mostly, you have a pure heart that didn't deserve a mother like me. I ask for forgiveness for not having had the courage to claim you publicly. I ask for forgiveness for having lied to Arthur, who would have been a wonderful father if I had been honest from the beginning. And I ask for forgiveness for leaving you alone. But I arrange everything so that you find your way back home. Valdira has specific instructions. If something goes wrong, Estella knows the whole truth and can help. You must find Arthur. You must live in the house where I was happy. You must know the love that I didn't know how to give you. I know that I will appear in your dreams sometimes. Don't be afraid. It's just my love trying to reach you through the distance that death has created between us. With all my love and regret, your mother, Lucinda. Arthur finished reading with tears streaming down his face. The whole puzzle finally fit together. Lucinda had orchestrated everything, her own death included, to ensure that Isis found a home where she would be loved. When he arrived home, he found Isis in the garden, drawing as always. But this time she wasn't alone. Carmen was sitting next to her, and both seemed to be having a serious conversation. "What are you talking about?" he asked, approaching. "Isis was telling me about a strange dream she had last night," said Carmen, her voice laden with concern. "What kind of dream?" Isis looked up, and Arthur saw in her eyes a wisdom that transcended her age. "I dreamed that the lady in white came to tell me that you were very sad because you found out things about her. She asked me to tell you that she is very sorry for having lied, but that she did everything out of love." The words hit Arthur like lightning. It was impossible for Isis to know about the letters, about what he had discovered at the bank. But somehow she knew. Did she say anything else? "She said that you are a very good man, and that she always knew you would take care of me when the time came." Isis stood up and approached him. "And she told me to tell you that she taught me to love you before I even met you." At that moment, all the walls that Arthur had built around his heart completely collapsed. He knelt before Isis and hugged her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," he whispered, "and you will never be alone again." But while father and daughter were hugging in the mansion's garden, none of them noticed the figure that was watching them from afar, hidden among the trees that surrounded the property. Valdira Santos had finally left the rehab clinic and now faced the most difficult decision of her life. The routine at the Davenport mansion had completely changed in the 2 weeks following the discovery of the letters. Arthur, who used to leave early and come back late, had now reorganized his schedule to spend more time with Isis. The girl blossomed under his attention, her smile becoming more frequent, her questions bolder, her confidence stronger. Carmen watched the transformation of both with growing satisfaction. The cold, controlled man she had known for 15 years was giving way to someone more human, more vulnerable. And Isis, who had arrived as a child haunted by abandonment, now ran through the corridors of the house as if she had always belonged there. But not everything was peace. On Friday morning, while Isis was playing in the garden and Arthur was working in his office, Carmen noticed a strange movement in the back of the property. Through the kitchen window, she saw a thin female figure hiding behind the trees that surrounded the mansion's wall. Initially, she thought it was just a curious person, but when the figure moved to a position with a better view of Isis, Carmen felt a chill in her stomach. There was something familiar about that silhouette, about the way the woman moved. "Mr. Davenport," she said, knocking on the office door, "I need you to come see something." Arthur followed her to the kitchen, where Carmen pointed discreetly to the back of the property. The woman was still there, now closer. and when she turned partially, both could see her profile. "My God," whispered Arthur. "It's Valdira." The woman who was watching Isis play was a destroyed version of the nurse he vaguely remembered seeing at the hospital years ago. Valdira was visibly thinner, her hair discolored by the sun and neglect, her clothes simple and worn. But it was her eyes that drew the most attention, fixed on Isis with an intensity that mixed love, regret, and something that seemed like despair. "She must have left the clinic," murmured Carmen. "What do we do?" Before Arthur could answer, Isis looked in the direction where Valdira was hiding. The girl's reaction was instantaneous and devastating. She dropped her toys and ran towards the wall, shouting a name that made the hearts of everyone present clench. "Mommy Valdira! Mommy Valdira!" Valdira hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between the desire to run to Isis and the fear of facing Arthur. But when she saw the girl trip while running and fall on the lawn, her maternal instinct spoke louder. "Isis!" She jumped over the low wall at the back and ran to the child, kneeling beside her. "My little one, are you hurt?" Isis threw herself into Valdira's arms, crying with relief and confusion. "You disappeared. I looked for you everywhere." "I know, my dear. Mommy was very sick and needed to go to a special place to get better." Arthur and Carmen approached cautiously. Up close, they could see that Valdira was truly different. There was a clarity in her eyes that didn't exist in the old photographs, a presence that suggested sobriety. But there was also a fragility that indicated how recent her recovery was. "Mr. Davenport," said Valdira, standing up slowly without letting go of Isis. "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to see how she was." "How long have you been watching us?" asked Arthur, maintaining a neutral tone despite the tension he felt. "A few days, since I left the clinic." Valdira looked at Isis, who was still clinging to her. "Stella told me that you discovered the truth about her." "I discovered a lot of things, yes." "Then you know that I am not her biological mother." "I know, but I also know that you took care of her when no one else could." Arthur's response surprised Valdira. She had prepared herself for hostility, accusations, perhaps even legal threats. She didn't expect understanding. I messed everything up," she said, her voice choked. "I promised Lucinda that I would take care of Isis, and I failed. The addiction was stronger than the love I felt for her." Isis looked from one adult to the other, trying to understand the conversation. "Mommy Valdira, are you going away again?" "I don't know, my little one. It doesn't just depend on me." Arthur observed the interaction between the two and felt a deep understanding of what was happening. Isis loved Valdira despite everything she had gone through. For her, Valdira was the only mother she had ever really known, the person who had been present in the first years of her life. "Let's talk inside," he said finally. "Isis shouldn't hear certain things." Carmen offered to stay with Isis in the garden while the adults talked. The girl, reluctant to separate from Valdira again, only agreed when she promised not to leave without saying goodbye. In the office, Valdira sat on the edge of the chair, clearly nervous. Her hands trembled slightly, not the tremor of addiction, but that of pure anxiety. "How is your recovery going?" asked Arthur. "Difficult, but I've been clean for 4 months. The doctors say I have a good chance if I continue treatment. And your plans, what do you intend to do now?" Valdira took a deep breath. "I came here to say goodbye to Isis properly, to explain that I can't take care of her as she deserves, but that I will always love her." "Is that all?" "Mr. Davenport, I know that you can give her everything that I never could. Education, security, true love. She paused, fighting back tears. "I just wanted her to know that I never abandoned her because I didn't love her. I abandoned her because I loved her too much to let her suffer more because of me." Arthur was silent for a long moment, processing Valdira's words. There was a brutal honesty in her confession that touched him deeply. "Valdira, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "In the letters that Lucinda left, She mentioned that you knew everything from the beginning, about Isis's father, about her plans. Why did you agree to participate in all this? Valdira closed her eyes, clearly struggling with painful memories. Because I was desperate too. My addiction had destroyed my career, my life. When Lucinda offered me money to take care of the baby, I saw a chance to start over. But it turned into something else. Much more. Isis became my daughter at heart. When Lucinda died and the money ran out, I tried to continue taking care of her with my own resources. But the addiction won. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell the truth? Because I was afraid. Afraid that you would take Isis from me, afraid to face the consequences of what I had done, afraid to admit that I had failed her. At that moment, the office door opened and Isis ran in, with Carmen right behind trying to catch up with her. "Sorry, sir. She said she needed to talk to you." Isis went straight to Valdira, holding her hand. "Mommy Valdira, I want you to live here with us." The girl's innocent statement created an awkward silence. Valdira looked at Arthur, expecting him to reject the idea immediately. But Arthur was thinking. Isis had gone through too much abandonment in her short life. Separating the girl from Valdira now, when the woman was clearly struggling to recover, would only be another trauma. "Valdira," he said finally, "would you be willing to continue supervised treatment?" "What do you mean?" "There are clinics in upstate New York. Outpatient treatment, but with daily monitoring. If you commit to that, you can stay." Valdira looked at him in disbelief. You would let me stay near Isis. I would let you try to regain the right to be near her, but with very clear conditions." Isis jumped for joy, hugging both Valdira and Arthur. "We're going to be a big family." But while the girl celebrated, Arthur couldn't help but wonder if he was making the right decision. There were still many things he didn't know about Valdira's past, many secrets that could come to light. And outside, a storm was approaching the mountains of upstate New York, bringing with it loaded clouds that threatened more than just rain. The storm that was announced in the mountains arrived with full force in the early hours of Saturday, bringing winds that made the mansion's windows shake, and rain that drummed on the colonial roof like impatient fingers. Isis woke up scared by the thunder, but for the first time in years, she wasn't alone in her fear. Valdira, who had agreed to stay in the maid's room at the back of the house, heard the small steps running down the hall and opened her door even before Isis knocked. "Mommy Valdira, I'm scared," whispered the girl, hugging the pink pajamas that Arthur had bought for her. "Come here, my little one." Valdira welcomed her into her arms, feeling as if a piece of her heart that had been broken for years finally returned to its place. "It's just rain. It can't hurt us." They sat on the narrow bed, Isis nestled against Valdira, who began to hum softly the same melody that Lucinda used to sing. It was an old lullaby which spoke about birds that flew home after the storm. On the other side of the house, Arthur was also awake, watching the rain through his bedroom window. The last few weeks had changed his life in ways he was still trying to understand. Isis's presence had awakened in him paternal instincts that he never knew he possessed. But Valdira's arrival complicated everything. The next morning, after the storm passed, a new routine began to establish itself. Valdira woke up early and prepared Isis's breakfast, a task she took on naturally and that Carmen ceded without resistance. The housekeeper had realized that the connection between Valdira and the girl was genuine and necessary for both. "How did you sleep, princess?" asked Valdira when Isis came down to the kitchen, still with her hair ruffled from sleep. "Better after you sang me the song. I dreamed about the lady in white again, but this time she was smiling." Valdira paused in the middle of flipping the pancakes. "What did she say in the dream?" "That she was happy because finally you and I were together again. And that Uncle Arthur was exactly the person she expected to take care of me." Isis's words touched Valdira deeply. Even after so much time, Lucinda still seemed to be guiding the events, ensuring that her daughter found her way to happiness. When Arthur came down for breakfast, he found a scene that made him stop at the kitchen door. Isis was sitting on the counter, swinging her legs while Valdira showed her how to crack eggs without dropping pieces of the shell. The two were laughing at something, and for the first time, Arthur saw Valdira truly relaxed. "Good morning," he said, entering the kitchen. "Daddy Arthur." Isis jumped off the counter and ran to hug him. The word daddy still surprised him every time he heard it, filling his heart with a happiness he didn't know how to express. "Valdira is teaching me how to cook," said Isis excitedly. "I'm going to make pancakes for you." During breakfast, Arthur discreetly observed the interaction between Valdira and Isis. There was a naturalness there that couldn't be faked, a love that had survived the years of separation and suffering. But he also noticed that Valdira avoided his gaze, clearly still insecure about her place in that new family dynamic. "Valdira," he said when Isis went out to play in the garden, "we need to talk about some practical things." "Sure. First, about the treatment. I scheduled an appointment for you at St. Francis Clinic on Monday. It's an outpatient program, but rigorous." "I understand. And if I fail—" "You won't fail," said Arthur with conviction. "But if you fail, you will have to stay away from Isis until you are really ready." Valdira nodded, accepting the conditions. "And, legally, what would my situation be here? For now, you would be a house employee, Carmen's helper, Isis's caregiver. This would give you legal status to be here and create a history of stability." "Mr. Davenport," Valdira hesitated, clearly struggling with something. "There are things about the past that you don't know yet. Things that might change your opinion about letting me stay." "What kind of things?" Before she could answer, Carmen entered the kitchen with a worried expression. "Mr. Davenport, there's a lady here who says she knows Valdira. She says it's very urgent." "Dee!" Through the kitchen window, Arthur saw a middle-aged woman standing in the front garden, clearly agitated. Valdira paled when she saw her. "It's Ruth Peterson," she murmured. "Social worker from the hospital. God, how did she find me?" The woman that Carmen brought into the living room was severe, with thick glasses and a rigid posture. Ruth was 41 years old and had the expression of someone who had seen too many family tragedies and lost faith in humanity along the way. "Mrs. Valdira Santos," she said without preamble, "2 years ago you disappeared with a minor under your responsibility. Now I discover that the child is here, with a stranger." "Mr. Davenport is not a stranger," defended Valdira, "and I didn't kidnap Isis. She was with me legally." "Legally?" Ruth laughed with disdain. "You were a drug addict who lost her job for stealing medication. What legality is there in that?" The accusation fell like a bomb. Arthur turned to Valdira, who had lowered her head, ashamed. "Is that true?" he asked. "Partially," whispered Valdira. I started taking only pain medication. After I got addicted, yes, I took others, but never to sell, just to use." "That's theft," said Ruth triumphantly, "and child abandonment. This child should have been in state custody for 2 years. At that moment, Isis ran into the living room, stopping abruptly when she saw the stranger. The girl looked at Valdira, then at Arthur, feeling the tension in the air. "What's going on?" she asked in her small voice. Ruth turned to her, analyzing her with clinical eyes. "You are Isis Santos." "I'm Isis Davenport now," replied the girl, instinctively moving close to Arthur. "Child, it doesn't matter where you are living now. I need to check if you are being well cared for and if this situation is appropriate." "I am well cared for," protested Isis, her cheeks flushing with indignation. "Daddy Arthur and Mommy Valdira take very good care of me." "Daddy Arthur?" Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Davenport, do you have custody documents for this child?" "Not yet, but—" "Then you have no legal right over her." Ruth opened her briefcase and took out some papers. I am here to take her to a temporary foster home while we investigate this situation. No, cried Isis, clinging to Arthur's leg. I don't want to go away. This is my home. Child, you have no choice in this matter. It was then that Valdira stood up, a new determination shining in her eyes. Ruth, can I talk to you in private? The two women retreated to the porch, while Arthur comforted Isis, who was crying desperately at the possibility of being separated again from the people she loved. What do you think Valdira is saying to her? Asked Carmen, watching through the window. I don't know, but I hope it's something that changes the situation. On the porch, Valdira was revealing something she had kept for years, a secret that could save Isis or completely destroy their chances of staying together. Ruth, do you remember Dr. Edward Miller? The cardiologist, of course. Why? He is Isis's biological father. Ruth stopped writing in her notepad. How do you know this? Because Lucinda Davenport told me. She gave me money to take care of the daughter she had with him, while pretending to her husband that she had never been pregnant. These are very serious accusations, Valdira. I have proof. Lucinda left documents, letters, even DNA tests she did secretly. Ruth looked through the window at Isis, who was still clinging to Arthur as if her life depended on it. If this is true, it completely changes the legal situation. Edward Miller is alive and well and successful in Connecticut. He's never known that he had a daughter. If you really want to do what is best for Isis, you should consider all the options before separating her from the only people she knows as family. When Valdira and Ruth returned to the living room, the social worker had a completely different expression, still serious but less hostile. Mr. Davenport, she said, it seems that this situation is more complex than I initially thought. I will need a few days to investigate certain allegations that have been made. What kind of allegations? About Isis's paternity. If what Valdira told me is true, there may be other people with legal rights over this child. Arthur felt the world spin around him. Another father. After everything they had gone through, would there be more complications? In the meantime, continued Ruth, Isis can stay here, but under weekly supervision, and I want complete documentation about everything. Medical care, education, home environment. After Ruth left, promising to return next week, Arthur turned to Valdira with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Thank you for not letting her take Isis. But now tell me, who is Edward Miller, and how does he complicate our situation? The revelation about Edward Miller hung over the Davenport mansion like a loaded cloud, altering the atmosphere of everything. Arthur spent the entire Sunday in the office, making calls and trying to find out more about the man who could completely change Isis's destiny. Valdira, in turn, faced her own internal storm. She had revealed the secret about Isis's biological father to save the girl from being taken by Ruth, but now she feared that her decision could result in losing Isis in an even more definitive way. "Mommy Valdira, why are you sad?" asked Isis, finding her sitting alone in the kitchen, looking at a cup of coffee that had cooled without being touched. "I'm not sad, my little one. I'm just thinking." "Thinking about what?" Valdira pulled Isis onto her lap, hugging her as if it were the last time. "About how to make the best choices for you. Sometimes adults need to make difficult decisions to protect the people they love. Like the lady in white did?" Isis's innocent question hit Valdira head-on, exactly like she did. That afternoon, Arthur returned from the office with information that changed everything. Edward Miller was not only a successful doctor in Connecticut, he was a renowned cardiologist, married for 15 years, father of 2 teenage children, and completely oblivious to the fact that he had a 6-year-old daughter in upstate New York. "I even found articles about him in medical journals," said Arthur to Valdira after Isis went to play in the garden. "He's a respected man, with an apparently happy family. And now?" Now I need to decide whether I contact him or wait to see what Ruth is going to do. Mr. Davenport, Valdira hesitated, I need to tell you something else. About how Lucinda met Edward. I'm listening. You and Lucinda were going through a very difficult time. You were constantly arguing about the issue of having children. Lucinda was undergoing treatment to get pregnant and was very emotionally fragile. Arthur remembered that time with pain. It had been a dark period in his marriage, when the frustration and sadness at not being able to have children had created an almost insurmountable distance between them. Edward was the doctor who was following her treatment. He was kind, understanding, and Lucinda was very vulnerable. Valdira paused, clearly struggling with the words. The relationship between them lasted only a few weeks. When Lucinda found out she was pregnant, Edward had already requested a transfer to another hospital in another state. Did he know about the pregnancy? No. Lucinda never told him. She said it had been her mistake to get involved with him and that she didn't want to complicate anyone else's life. But now, 6 years later, that decision could cost Isis the only family she knows. At that night, after Isis fell asleep, Arthur made a decision that surprised even himself. He picked up the phone and dialed Edward Miller's office number in Connecticut. Dr. Miller, my name is Arthur Davenport. I need to talk to you about something very important related to Lucinda Davenport. The pause on the other end of the line was long. Lucinda, how is she? I lost contact years ago. She passed away 5 years ago, Doctor. But before she left, she made some revelations that you need to know. 3 days later, Edward Miller arrived in upstate New York, driving a black sedan, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Throughout the 4-hour trip from Connecticut, he had tried to process the devastating information that Arthur had shared over the phone. A daughter. He had a 6-year-old daughter he never knew existed. Edward was a 48-year-old man, grey hair at the temples, an upright posture of someone who was used to making difficult decisions in life or death situations. But nothing in his medical experience had prepared him for that moment. When he arrived at the Davenport mansion, he was greeted by Arthur with a tense cordiality. The two men greeted each other with the formality of those who knew they were about to navigate turbulent emotional waters. "Where is she?" was Edward's first question. "Playing in the garden. But before you meet her, we need to talk." In the office, Arthur showed Edward Lucinda's letters, the photographs, all the documents proving paternity. The doctor read everything in silence, his expressions alternating between shock, sadness, and something that seemed like guilt. "I remember those weeks," he said finally. "Lucinda was very fragile, very sad, and I was going through problems in my own marriage. It wasn't something planned." "I know that. The question now is, what do we do with this information?" "I want to meet her," said Edward without hesitation. "I want to meet my daughter." "But you have a family in Connecticut." "I do, and they will have to understand. I can't pretend I don't know about Isis's existence now." When Valdira learned that Edward had arrived, she felt like the world was crumbling once more. For 2 days, she had watched Isis play, laugh, call Arthur Daddy, and had allowed herself to dream that maybe, finally, they had found stability. "He's going to want to take her away," she said to Carmen, while they watched Isis through the window. "Maybe not. Mr. Davenport is a good man. He will do what is best for her. And if what is best is for her to go with her real father." Carmen had no answer for that. The first meeting between Edward and Isis took place in the mansion's garden, with all the adults present. Isis was drawing birds when Arthur approached with a strange man in glasses and a suit. "Isis, I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is Dr. Edward." The girl looked up, studying the man's face with curiosity. "Are you a doctor like the doctor who takes care of me?" "I am," said Edward, kneeling to get to her height. "And you must be the Isis I've heard so much about." "Heard about where?" Edward looked at Arthur, seeking guidance on how to proceed, from people who know you and speak very highly of you. For an hour, Edward watched Isis play, ask questions, interact with Valdira and Arthur. He could see his traits in the girl's face, the shape of her eyes, the line of her nose, even some gestures. But mostly he saw a happy, well-cared-for child, surrounded by people who clearly loved her. "She's good here," he said to Arthur when they retreated to talk in private. "I can see that you love her. We love her very much. But I understand that you have rights." "Rights?" Edward shook his head. "What rights do I have? Isis doesn't even know who I am. For her, you are the father. Valdira is the mother. I'm just a stranger. But you are her biological father. Being a biological father is just genetics. Being a real father is what you have been doing, caring, loving, protecting." Edward looked through the window at Isis, who was now teaching Valdira how to draw. "I didn't come here to destroy the family she found." "Then why did you come?" "To meet her, to make sure she's okay, and to maybe be a part of her life if that's possible." It was at that moment that Ruth Peterson returned, accompanied this time by a bailiff and carrying documents that would make everything crumble once more. "Mr. Davenport," she said, entering the room where everyone was gathered, "after investigating the allegations about Isis's paternity, I must inform you that the state has initiated a custody determination process." "What does that mean?" asked Valdira, paling. "It means that until the legal situation is resolved, Isis will be placed in a neutral foster home, where there will be no conflict of interest between the possible guardians." Isis, who was playing in the corner of the room, turned around when she heard her name. "What's happening?" "Nothing, my dear," said Arthur quickly, but his voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davenport, but I have orders to take the child today." It was then that Edward stood up, his medical presence imposing itself in the room. "Mrs. Peterson, I am Dr. Edward Miller, Isis's biological father, and I would like to propose an alternative solution." Edward's proposal created a tense silence in the room. Ruth watched him skeptically, clearly not expecting the biological father to appear at the exact moment when she came to pick up Isis. "What kind of alternative solution, Dr. Miller?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "I propose that Isis remain exactly where she is, under judicial supervision if necessary, while all interested parties, myself, Mr. Arthur, and Valdira, work together to determine what is best for her." "That's highly irregular. More irregular than separating a 6-year-old child from the only people she knows as family." Edward kept his voice calm, but there was authority in it. "Mrs. Peterson, I have been a doctor for 20 years. I have seen many children traumatized by abrupt changes in their care environments." Isis approached Arthur, clearly frightened by the tension that had taken over the room. "Daddy Arthur, what does the lady want with me?" The word daddy echoed through the room with devastating force. Edward felt as if he had been punched in the stomach when he realized that his biological daughter called another man dad, and did so with genuine love. "Nothing, princess," said Arthur, picking her up in his arms. "The adults are just talking about boring things." Ruth observed the interaction with clinical eyes, but Arthur could see that she was being affected by the obviousness of the bond between him and Isis. "Dr. Miller," she said finally, "you have a family in Connecticut. How do you intend to reconcile this situation?" "My wife and my children know I'm here. I told them the whole truth before I came." Edward paused, taking a deep breath. It wasn't easy, but they understood that this happened a long time ago, during a difficult period in our marriage. He looked through the window at Isis. "My children were curious about having a younger sister. They want to meet her." "And what exactly would your proposal be?" "That Isis continue living here, with Arthur and Valdira, but that I have the right to visit her regularly and participate in important decisions about her education and health. A shared custody, so to speak." "That will never work," murmured Ruth, but there was something in her voice that suggested she was considering the possibility. "Why not?" asked Valdira, speaking for the first time since Edward had made his proposal. Isis can have 3 people who love her taking care of her instead of being thrown into a strange foster home. At that moment, Isis looked at Edward with curiosity. "Mr. Doctor, are you going to visit us? If I'm welcome, yes. Do you know how to draw birds?" The innocent question drew a smile from Edward's tense face. "Not very well, but I can learn. I can teach you. I know how to draw many kinds of birds." Ruth observed the interaction for a few moments, then sighed heavily. "I will grant 1 week. 1 week for you to prove to me that this unusual arrangement can work in the best interest of the child." "And then?" asked Arthur. "Then we will do a complete evaluation. Psychologists, social workers, background checks on everyone involved. If everything is in order, perhaps we can formalize a shared custody situation." After Ruth left, the 4 adults gathered in the living room while Isis played in the garden, oblivious to the complexity of the negotiations that had just determined her future. "Thank you," said Arthur to Edward. "Your intervention saved Isis from being taken today. I did what any father would do. I protected my daughter. But you barely know her. I know enough to know that she is happy here, and I know enough about medicine to know that separating her from you now would be detrimental to her emotional development." Valdira, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "Dr. Miller, can I ask a personal question?" "Sure. How did your family react when you told them about Isis?" Edward paused, clearly struggling with the answer. "My wife was shocked, hurt. But she understood that this happened a long time ago, during a difficult period in our marriage." He looked through the window at Isis. "My children were curious about having a younger sister. They want to meet her. And you? How do you feel about all this?" "Confused, guilty for not having known about her existence before, grateful that she is well cared for, and haunted by the responsibility of suddenly having a daughter." Carmen, who had listened to everything in silence, spoke up. "If you allow the opinion of someone who has taken care of children her whole life, what matters is not how we got here, but how we take care of her from now on." In the days that followed, a strange but functional routine began to establish itself. Edward commuted between Connecticut and upstate New York, spending 3 days a week at the Davenport mansion, gradually getting to know his daughter and learning about her personality, her fears, her joys. Isis adapted to his presence with the natural ease of children. She didn't fully understand who he was beyond a very kind doctor who likes to spend time with us. But that seemed sufficient for her. "Dr. Miller," she said one afternoon, while trying to teach him how to draw a bluebird, "do you have children?" "I do. 2 teenage children." "Do they like to draw too?" "Not really. They prefer sports and video games." Isis considered this for a moment. "Maybe they just haven't found the right drawings yet. Everyone likes something beautiful." Isis's simple wisdom touched Edward deeply. Here was a child who had gone through abandonment and suffering, but who still believed that everyone had goodness inside them. It was during one of those afternoons that something extraordinary happened. Isis was drawing when she suddenly stopped, her eyes filling with tears. "What's wrong, my little one?" asked Valdira, approaching quickly. The lady in white appeared again, but this time she was awake. All the adults exchanged glances, alarmed. Isis had never reported seeing Lucinda while she was awake. "What did she say?" asked Edward, trying to keep his voice calm. "She said she was happy because now I have 3 people who love me taking care of me, and she said to thank you for coming to meet me." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "Anything else?" "She said she won't appear in my dreams anymore because now I know I'm safe, and—" Isis hesitated, looking at all the adults. "She said that you were all chosen to take care of me for some special reason." That night, after Isis fell asleep, Edward had a conversation that would change everything with Arthur. "I need to tell you something," said Edward, "about Lucinda, about how we really met. I thought I knew everything. Not everything." Edward took a deep breath. Lucinda wasn't just my patient. She was doing an experimental treatment that I was conducting, a treatment for couples with fertility problems. And the treatment worked. Lucinda got pregnant, but not by me. Arthur stared at him, confused. I don't understand. Arthur, the treatment that Lucinda did was successful. She got pregnant by you. Isis is your biological daughter. Arthur's world stopped. That's impossible. The exams, the tests, always said I couldn't have children. The exams were wrong, or the conditions changed. It happens more than people imagine. Edward paused, observing the shock on Arthur's face. Lucinda found out the truth when she did a secret DNA test after Isis was born. She contacted me in a panic, confessed our brief relationship, but when I did my own test, I wasn't her father. Then why didn't she ever tell me? Why did she pretend that Isis was someone else's daughter? Because she was afraid that you would doubt her. She was afraid that you would think she was lying to cover up the betrayal. And mostly, Edward paused, his voice getting softer, because the feeling of guilt for having betrayed you, even if briefly, was consuming her alive. Arthur sat down heavily, processing the most devastating revelation of all. Isis was not only the daughter of the woman he loved, she was his own biological daughter, the child he had wanted to have for years and who had been looking for him without him knowing. My God, he whispered, my daughter was living on the streets while you were living your life without knowing she existed. It wasn't your fault, Arthur. But Arthur was already running to Isis's room, needing to see her, needing to make sure she was safe, needing to understand that the child he had saved in the alley was, in fact, the daughter he had always dreamed of having. Arthur stopped at the door of Isis's room, his hand trembling on the doorknob. On the other side of that door was his daughter, his own biological daughter, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that the whole truth about her origin had finally come to light. He opened the door slowly, trying not to wake her up. The soft light from the hallway illuminated Isis's angelic face, and for the first time Arthur could clearly see his own traits reflected in her. The shape of her forehead, the curve of her eyebrows, even the way she slept with one hand under the pillow, exactly like he did. My daughter, he whispered, the tears flowing freely down his face. My own daughter. Edward appeared behind him, watching in silence. Lucinda was so terrified of the possibility of losing you that she preferred to give up her own daughter. How could she carry that secret alone? How could she suffer so much in silence? Because she loved you more than anything, and because she hated herself for having betrayed you, even for such a brief moment. Arthur closed the door carefully, and the two men went down to the living room, where Valdira and Carmen were waiting for them. The weight of the revelation hung over everyone like a dense cloud. Valdira, said Arthur, sitting down heavily, did you know? No, she replied immediately. Lucinda never told me. She told me that you weren't the father, and I never questioned it. I just worried about taking care of Isis as best as I could. But the documents in the safe deposit box were falsified, explained Edward. Lucinda altered the results of the DNA test because she was so consumed by guilt that she could no longer distinguish between truth and lies in her own mind. Carmen spoke up, her voice soft but firm. Mr. Davenport, what matters now is not what Lucinda did or didn't do. What matters is that Isis is finally where she should have always been, with her real father. But she doesn't know, murmured Arthur. How am I going to tell her? How do I explain that I'm her biological father after everything she's already discovered about her origin? Carefully, replied Edward, and maybe not now. She has just found stability. Maybe it's better to let that truth reveal itself naturally. The next morning, Isis woke up and went down for breakfast, finding all the adults with strange expressions, as if they had shared an important secret during the night. Why is everyone weird today? She asked. climbing into the chair next to Arthur. "Weird how?" he asked, trying to keep his voice normal. "You're looking at me differently, like I grew up overnight or something." Isis's perspicacity always surprised the adults. At 6 years old, she had developed a keen sensitivity to changes in the emotional environment around her. "It's just that we're very happy," said Valdira, serving her pancakes. "Sometimes when people get very happy, they make a strange face anyway." Isis accepted the explanation with the ease typical of children, but Arthur could see that she continued to watch everyone with curiosity. 2 days later, Ruth returned for her promised evaluation, accompanied by a child psychologist named Dr. Beverly Stern. The tension in the house was palpable when the two professionals arrived, carrying folders and notebooks. "How is the shared custody arrangement going?" asked Ruth, watching Isis play in the garden with Edward, who was trying to draw a robin under her patient guidance. "Better than we expected," replied Arthur honestly. "Isis has adapted well to Edward's presence. She sees him as a special friend who comes to visit her." "And the daily care?" "Valdira takes care of the morning routine. I take care of the afternoon activities, and Edward participates whenever he's here. Carmen supervises everything and ensures that Isis maintains regular schedules." Dr. Stern watched the interactions through the window with professional interest. "Can I talk to Isis alone?" "Of course." The psychologist spent an hour with Isis in the garden, asking simple questions about how she felt, about her fears, about the people who took care of her. Arthur watched anxiously through the window, trying to interpret the professional's expressions. When the conversation ended, Dr. Stern returned inside with a thoughtful expression. "Well?" asked Valdira, clearly nervous. "Isis is an exceptional child. She shows signs of past trauma, which is expected considering her history, but she also shows a remarkable ability to adapt." The psychologist paused, consulting her notes. "She refers to the 3 adults, Arthur, Valdira, and Edward, in different but all positive ways. For her, you form a safety net." "Is that good or bad?" asked Edward. "It's unusual, but not necessarily bad. Isis has learned to find security in multiple support figures. Considering that she has gone through multiple abandonments, this may be a healthy survival strategy." Ruth asked more questions about the financial situation, the educational plans for Isis, the housing conditions. All the answers seemed to satisfy her. "There is a legal issue that we need to address," she said finally. "Dr. Miller, you mentioned that you are not the child's biological father. We have the results of the tests I ordered, and they confirm that." Edward nodded. "Yes, I'm not the biological father." "Then who is?" The silence that followed was charged with tension. Arthur looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. "I am," said Arthur simply. Ruth raised her eyebrows. "How did you find out about that?" "Through more accurate medical exams. The old tests were incorrect." "That completely changes the legal situation," said Ruth, taking notes frantically. "If you are the biological father and are willing to assume legal custody—" "I am. More than willing." "And you too?" She addressed Valdira and Edward. "What would your role be in this new arrangement?" "Valdira has been a mother to Isis," said Arthur. "I would like her to continue being a part of her life, perhaps as an official caregiver. And I would like to maintain regular contact," added Edward. "Isis has gotten used to me, and it would be cruel to cut that connection abruptly." Dr. Stern spoke up. "From a psychological point of view, maintaining the stability that Isis has found would be ideal. She has created solid bonds with all of you." That afternoon, after the authorities left, promising a decision in a week, Isis asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Daddy Arthur, why does everyone keep talking about who my real father is?" Arthur knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. "Why do you ask that, Princess?" "Because I already know who my real father is. It's you." She hugged him tightly. "You saved me when I was scared, gave me a home, loved me. Doesn't that make you my real father?" Isis's simple words touched everyone present deeply. From her point of view, fatherhood had nothing to do with biology. It had to do with love, care, presence. "It does," whispered Arthur, hugging her back. "It makes me the luckiest man in the world." That night, Edward was preparing to return to Connecticut when Isis ran to him with a drawing. "I made this for you to take to your children," she said, handing him a paper where she had drawn a big family: Arthur, Valdira, Edward, two figures that clearly represented Edward's teenage children, and herself in the center, surrounded by colorful birds. "What did you draw here?" asked Edward, moved. "Our big family. The lady in white once told me that family can be made of people who choose each other, not just people who are born together." Edward looked at the drawing, then at the girl who had changed his life in a matter of weeks. "Can I ask you a question, Isis?" "You can. Would you be happy if I continued visiting you, even knowing that you already have a daddy?" Isis considered the question seriously. "You can be my father of the heart, like Mommy Valdira is my mother of the heart. There's room for everyone." Later, as Edward drove back to Connecticut that night, carrying Isis's drawing in the passenger seat, he reflected on how a 6-year-old child had taught him more about family in a few weeks than he had learned in 48 years of life. Back at the mansion, Arthur was putting Isis to sleep when she made another observation that left him speechless. "Daddy, I think the lady in white knew from the beginning that you were my real father. That's why she sent me to that alley where you found me." "Why do you think that?" "Because in the last dream I had with her, she was smiling and she said, 'Mission accomplished, my little one. Now you are where you should have always been.'" As Isis fell asleep, Arthur remained beside her bed, finally understanding that all the events of the past few months, the encounter in the alley, Valdira's arrival, the revelations about Lucinda, even Edward's appearance, had been part of a larger plan that his late wife had orchestrated to ensure that her daughter found her way back home. The week of waiting for the final decision of the authorities passed in an atmosphere of cautious hope. The routine at the Davenport mansion had found its natural rhythm. Isis woke up early and had breakfast with Valdira, spent the morning studying with a private tutor that Arthur had hired, played in the garden during the afternoons, and had dinner with the whole family gathered when Edward was present. It was an unconventional family, but it worked in a way that surprised even those who lived it daily. On Thursday of that week, something unexpected happened. Estella Monroe appeared at the door of the mansion, carrying a small suitcase and with an expression that mixed determination and nervousness. "Mr. Davenport," she said when Carmen brought her to the living room, "I came to return something that belongs to Isis, something that Valdira left me keeping a long time ago." The suitcase that Estella carried was old, made of worn leather, with golden clasps that had lost their shine. When she opened it on the table in the living room, it revealed treasures that made Valdira cover her mouth with her hands. "My God," she whispered, "I thought I had lost all this." Inside the suitcase were photographs of baby Isis, some small toys, carefully folded children's clothes, and in the background a leather album with the word Isis engraved in golden letters on the cover. "Valdira brought this to me when she was very sick," explained Estella. "She said that if something happened to her, I should deliver everything to Isis when she was safe and happy." Isis, who had come down after hearing voices in the room, approached curiously. "What is that, Mrs. Monroe?" "They are your things, my dear. Things that your mommy Valdira kept from when you were little." With almost religious reverence, Isis opened the album. The first pages showed photographs of her as a baby in Valdira's arms, but also other photographs that left her confused. "Mommy Valdira, who is this lady who is holding me here?" Valdira looked at the photograph that Isis was pointing to and felt her heart race. It was an image of Lucinda holding baby Isis, clearly taken secretly during one of the biological mother's visits. It was a friend of mine who liked you very much. She looks like the lady in white from my dreams." Arthur approached to see the photograph, and the impact was devastating. There was Lucinda, radiant with happiness, holding his newborn daughter. It was an image he had never seen, a moment of pure maternal joy that his wife had lived in secret. "There are more things in the album," said Estella softly. As Isis turned the pages, the secret history of her early years was revealed. Photographs of Lucinda feeding her, playing with her, reading stories. In all the images, Lucinda's happiness was evident, contrasting dramatically with the sadness that Arthur remembered her carrying in those last years. "Look, Daddy!" exclaimed Isis, pointing to a photograph where she, about 2 years old, was in the garden of the Davenport mansion. "It's our house. I've been here before." The revelation hit Arthur like lightning. How is that possible?" "Lucinda brought Isis to visit the house sometimes," explained Valdera, her voice laden with emotion. "Always when you were traveling for work, she said she wanted Isis to know the place where she should be growing up." "That's why she knew the house so well when she arrived," murmured Carmen. "That's why she knew where the rooms were." Isis continued leafing through the album, finding more treasures. Letters written by Lucinda to her, to be read when she grew up, drawings that she herself had made when she was little, and on the last page, something that made everyone in the room freeze. It was a letter from Lucinda, but this one was different from the others. It was addressed to Arthur. "To my dear husband, if one day you discover the whole truth—" Arthur took the letter with trembling hands, reading in silence while everyone waited. His expressions changed as he absorbed his wife's final words. "What does she say?" asked Valdera softly. Arthur wiped the tears from his eyes before speaking. She explains everything. Why she lied, why she was afraid to tell the truth, how she planned every detail so that Isis would find her way back to me." "Read to us," asked Edward, who had arrived moments before. "My dear Arthur," he began, "if you are reading this, it means that our daughter is finally where she should have always been, in your arms. I know you must be angry with me for having lied, for having taken her away from you, for having caused so much unnecessary suffering." Arthur paused, controlling his emotion. "But you need to understand that every decision I made was driven by fear. Fear of losing you, fear that you would doubt me, fear that you would reject Isis because of my mistakes. Edward was a mistake, a moment of weakness when I thought our marriage was over. But Isis was the miracle we always asked for. She is your daughter, Arthur, your biological daughter. The exams that I falsified were to protect my secret, not to hide the truth from you." Isis listened to everything in silence, her big eyes trying to understand the complexity of the emotions of the adults around her. "I planned everything so that, when the time came, Isis would find you naturally. I asked Valdera to leave her on the streets, close to the places where you usually pass. I knew that your good heart would not resist a child in danger. And I knew that once you brought her home, you would discover all the truth on your own. Forgive me for having left without explaining everything personally. The guilt was consuming me, and I knew that if I stayed, I would end up telling everything in a way that could destroy your ability to love Isis freely. Take good care of her, my love. Love her for both of us. And if one day she asks about me, tell her that I loved her more than life itself, but that I didn't know how to show that love in the right way. Forever yours, Lucinda." The silence that followed was broken only by Valdera's restrained sobs. Even Carmen, always pragmatic, wiped tears discreetly. Isis, with her childish wisdom, approached Arthur and touched his tear-stained face. "Daddy, why are you sad? The lady in white isn't sad anymore in the dreams." "I'm not sad, Princess. I'm feeling many things at the same time. Good or bad? Good. Very good." At that moment the phone rang. It was Ruth, with the final decision of the authorities. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice carrying an obvious satisfaction, The process has been approved. You will have full legal custody of Isis, with guaranteed visitation rights for Edward and official caregiver status for Valdira. When Arthur hung up the phone and announced the decision, Isis jumped for joy. "Does that mean I can stay forever?" "Forever and ever," he confirmed, picking her up in his arms. "And Mommy Valdira too?" "Too. And Uncle Edward will continue visiting?" "He will." Isis hugged Arthur tightly, then extended her arms to include Valdira and Edward in the hug. "Now we're a real family." While everyone was hugging in the mansion's living room, surrounded by the photographs and memories that told Isis's secret story, no one noticed the transparent figure watching them from the garden door. Lucinda smiled one last time before disappearing definitively, her mission finally accomplished. Her daughter was home, surrounded by the love she always deserved to have, but could only now receive freely. Outside, the blue hydrangeas in the garden swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, as if they were dancing in celebration. The house that had kept so many secrets now breathed only peace and love, preparing to write a new chapter in the history of the family that had formed in such an improbable but so perfect way. The truth had finally freed them all, and the future stretched ahead like a road lit by the sun, full of possibilities and promises of true happiness. 3 months had passed since the official custody decision, and life at the Davenport mansion had found a harmonious rhythm that surprised even the most optimistic. Autumn had arrived in upstate New York with its palette of golden colors, and the property's gardens reflected the change of seasons with a melancholic beauty that inspired Isis's increasingly elaborate drawings. The girl had grown not only physically, but emotionally. Her smiles were more frequent, her questions bolder, and her confidence in the world around her stronger. She attended a private school nearby, where she quickly became loved by teachers and classmates for her precocious intelligence and artistic sensitivity, but not everything was perfect harmony. That Saturday morning, Edward arrived for his weekly visit, bringing with him news that would again change the family dynamic. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said, after Isis went out to play in the garden with the friends she had made at school. Arthur, Valdira, and Carmen gathered in the living room, observing the serious expression on the doctor's face. "I received a job offer," continued Edward. "New York Presbyterian Hospital offered me the chairmanship of the cardiology department. It's a unique opportunity in my career." "Congratulations," said Arthur, but his voice carried apprehension. "Does that mean you're moving?" "Probably, but before making any decision, I wanted to talk to you about how this would affect Isis." Valdira spoke up, her voice laden with concern. "She's gotten used to your visits. They will be much more difficult if you're in New York City." "I know. That's why I thought of an alternative." Edward paused, clearly nervous. "My wife and I talked a lot about it. We would like to invite Isis to spend a few weeks during school vacation with us in New York City, to meet her half-siblings, to better understand this part of her family." The proposal created a tense silence. Arthur felt torn between what was best for Isis and his instinctive fear of losing her again. "How would she react to that?" asked Carmen, ever practical. "I don't know. That's why I want to talk to her first, explain slowly, see how she feels." When Isis returned from the garden, she found all the adults with serious expressions in the room. Her keen sensitivity immediately captured the tension. "Did something bad happen?" she asked, approaching Arthur. "No, Princess. Uncle Edward has news to tell you." Edward knelt before Isis, taking her small hands in his. "Isis, how would you feel if I had to move far away?" The girl's face immediately darkened. "Very far. To New York City. It's a big city, about 4 hours from here. You won't visit me anymore?" "I will, but maybe not every week, maybe once a month." Isis processed that information in silence for a few moments. "And why do you have to move?" "Because of my job. They offered for me to take care of a very important hospital. Like when Daddy Arthur travels for work. Similar, but for longer. To everyone's surprise, Isis smiled. Then you're going to help a lot of people get better? That's good. The maturity of her response touched Edward deeply. Thank you for understanding, little one. But there's something else I wanted to ask you. What? Would you like to meet my family? My wife and my children? They are very curious about you. Isis looked at Arthur, seeking guidance. Can I meet them? Of course you can, but only if you want to. Are they my brothers, aren't they? The direct question caught Edward off guard. Well, technically no, but if you want to consider them that. I would like to meet. I've never had siblings before. 2 weeks later, the whole family gathered for the first video conference between Isis and Edward's family in New York City. Marina, Edward's wife, was an elegant woman of 45 years, with a warm smile that immediately reassured Isis. The children, Pedro 16 and Anna 14, appeared on the screen with obvious curiosity. Hi, Isis, said Anna excitedly. Dad talks about you a lot. He said you draw beautiful birds. Hi, do you want to see my drawings? For an hour, Isis showed her artistic works through the camera, while Pedro and Anna asked questions about her life in upstate New York. The naturalness of the interaction surprised all the adults present. Isis, said Marina at the end of the conversation, we would very much like you to come visit us. We could go to the zoo, to the museums in New York City. There are many different birds that you could draw. Can I, Daddy? Asked Isis, turning to Arthur. If you want to go, you can. I want to, but will you miss me? Of course we will, replied Valdira, but we also want you to meet new people and see new places. A month later, the moment arrived for Isis's first visit to New York City. Arthur and Valdira drove her to the city, where Edward was waiting for them at the family's apartment. The farewell was harder than anyone expected. Isis, who had shown herself excited throughout the trip, suddenly seemed very small when it was time to say goodbye to Arthur and Valdira. Will you be here when I come back? She asked, hugging Arthur. We will be waiting for you always, he promised. And if I don't like staying here, then you call us and we'll pick you up immediately. During the 5 days that she spent in New York City, Isis kept in daily contact by phone. Her calls told of adventures at the zoo, visits to museums, playing with Pedro and Anna, but also expressed a constant longing for home. Aunt Marina is very nice, she said in one of those calls, and Pedro taught me how to play video games, but I want to sleep in my bed. Just 2 more days, Princess, Arthur consoled. Can I count how many hours are left? When she finally returned to upstate New York, Isis threw herself into Arthur's arms as if she had been away for months. She had presents for everyone, a book about urban birds for herself, a scarf that Anna had helped choose for Valdira, and a special pen for Arthur. How was it? Asked Carmen, observing how Isis clung to Arthur. It was good, but very different. Their house is in a very tall building, and you can't see the garden from the window. Isis paused thoughtfully. And they watch television at dinner time. Here we talk. Did you like your Edward's children? I like them a lot. Pedro showed me some drawings he does on the computer, and Anna taught me how to make bracelets, but she hesitated. But what? I'm not like them. They have known Daddy Edward since they were born. I've only known him for a few months. Isis's perspicacious observation revealed a mature understanding of the complexity of her family situation. That night, while Isis slept exhausted from the trip and the excitement, Arthur and Valdira talked about the future. Will she want to visit them again? Asked Valdira. I think so, but I also think she understood that home is here. And Edward, how will he deal with moving to New York City? He's a good man. He will find a way to stay in touch without pressuring Isis. Indeed, when Edward called the following week to say goodbye before the move, his words confirmed Arthur's intuition. Isis taught me something important in these months, he said. Love isn't about possession or biological rights. It's about wanting the best for the person you love, even when that means taking a back seat. "She will always have a special place in her heart for you," Arthur assured, "and I will always be available when she needs me. But I know that you are the father she chose, and Valdira is the mother she knows. My role is different, but no less important." 3 months after Edward's move, life returned to its familiar rhythm. The weekly calls maintained contact, the quarterly visits created special moments, but the solid foundation of Isis's life remained unchanged. Arthur, Valdira, Carmen, the mansion with its gardens, and the school where she flourished academically. It was on one of those quiet autumn afternoons that Isis made an observation that perfectly summarized her journey of self-discovery. "Daddy," she said while drawing on the porch, "I understood something important." "What was it, Princess?" "Family isn't just the people who live with you. It's also the people who carry you in their heart, even when they are far away." Arthur looked at his daughter, marveling once more at her precocious wisdom, and knew that Lucinda would be proud of the strong and loving girl that her daughter had become, despite all the adversities she had faced in her few years of life. Winter arrived in upstate New York with its characteristic chill, and the Davenport mansion was preparing for a special celebration. Isis would turn 7 in 2 weeks, and for the first time in her life, she would have a birthday party with all those she loved present. The preparations had begun a month before, with Isis actively participating in every decision. She wanted a party in the garden, even in the cold, because the birds should also participate in the celebration. Arthur had outdoor heaters and an elegant tent installed that would allow the outdoor party without discomfort. "How many friends do you want to invite from school?" asked Valdira, sitting with Isis at the kitchen table, making the guest list. "Everyone in my class, and Teacher Marcia too, because she's very nice." Isis paused, biting the tip of her pencil. "And will Edward be able to come with his family?" "He promised he will," assured Arthur, who was passing through the kitchen carrying decorations. "In fact, Anna said she's preparing a special surprise for you." "What kind of surprise?" "If I tell you, it won't be a surprise anymore," he joked, kissing the top of her head. During the 2 weeks of preparation, something extraordinary happened. Isis began to have different dreams, no longer with the lady in white, but with colored birds that flew in formation, carrying golden ribbons in their beaks. She drew these dreams every morning, creating a collection of vibrant images that left everyone impressed. "They are the birds of happiness," she explained to Carmen, showing her most recent drawing. "They appear when people find where they truly belong." Carmen observed the drawing with emotion. "And where do you belong, my dear?" "Here," replied Isis without hesitating. "With you forever." 3 days before the party, an unexpected surprise arrived at the door of the mansion. Estella Monroe appeared accompanied by a younger woman who was carrying a small child in her arms. "Mr. Davenport," said Estella, "I would like you to meet my granddaughter, Julia, and my great-granddaughter, Sophia. They came from Washington, D.C., especially to meet Isis." Julia was a 28-year-old woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Sophia, just 3 years old, hid her face in her mother's shoulder, clearly shy. "Why did you want to meet Isis?" asked Arthur, curious. "Because your story inspired me to reconnect with my own family," explained Julia. "When my grandmother told me about how a lost girl found a family who chose her, I realized that I had wasted too much time being too proud to resolve our family differences." Isis came down the stairs at that moment and stopped when she saw the visitors. Sophia raised her head, and the 2 girls looked at each other with mutual curiosity. "Hi," said Isis softly. "Do you want to see my bird drawings?" Sophia nodded timidly, and in a few minutes the 2 were sitting on the floor of the living room, with Isis patiently explaining each drawing to the smaller girl. "She has a way with children," observed Julia to Valdira. "She does. I think it's because she remembers what it was like to be lost and scared." During the rest of the afternoon, Isis and Sophia played together, and Arthur could observe another facet of his daughter's personality. She was naturally protective of younger children, demonstrating an empathy that came from her own experiences of vulnerability. "Can I invite Sophia to my party?" asked Isis when the visitors were preparing to leave. "Of course you can," replied Estella. "It would be an honor to participate in the celebration." On the morning of the birthday, Isis woke up before dawn, vibrating with excitement. She found Valdira already in the kitchen, preparing the chocolate cake that she had promised to make. "Happy birthday, my little one," said Valdira, hugging her tight. 7 years old. You're growing into a young lady." 7 years, repeated Isis, as if she was testing how the age sounded. "Last year I was in a very different situation." "And how do you feel about that?" Isis thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes I get sad thinking about the children who are still going through what I went through. But mostly I feel grateful for having found you. You saved us too, you know." "How?" "You taught Daddy Arthur how to love without fear. You gave me a second chance to be a mother. You showed all of us that family is about choice, not about chance." During the day, the house filled with activity. Edward arrived with Marina, Pedro, and Anna, who immediately joined the final preparations. Isis's school friends began to arrive in the mid-afternoon, transforming the garden into an ocean of laughter and games. But the most exciting moment came when Anna presented her special surprise. With Pedro's help, she had created a handmade book with all the photographs that Edward had taken of Isis over the months of visits, organized chronologically and accompanied by short texts about each special moment. "That way you'll never forget how you got here," explained Anna, handing the book to Isis. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received," said Isis, leafing through the pages with reverence. During the party, Arthur watched his daughter interacting with all the guests and felt his heart overflow with pride. Isis had transformed from a traumatized and distrustful child into a confident, generous, and radiantly happy girl. "What are you thinking about?" asked Valdira, approaching him. "About how our life has completely changed in less than a year. For the better. For infinitely better." And when it was time for the cake, everyone gathered around the table decorated with flowers from the garden and drawings of birds that Isis had made especially for the occasion. The 7 candles flickered in the soft afternoon breeze, and when Isis closed her eyes to make her wish, the entire garden seemed to fall into respectful silence. "What did you wish for?" asked Sophia, who had become her shadow throughout the party. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true," replied Isis. "But I can say that it was something for other children who need to find their families too." Later, when the guests began to leave, Edward approached Arthur for a private conversation. "I want you to know that these months knowing Isis have changed my perspective on many things," he said. "How so?" "Marina and I decided to become a foster family. We want to offer other children the same kind of love that Isis found here." "That's wonderful, Edward." It was her inspiration. Seeing how a child who went through so much suffering has transformed into such a generous and loving person, it showed us the transformative power of unconditional love. That night, after all the presents had been opened and the garden was silent again, Isis asked to stay a little longer on the porch with Arthur and Valdira. "It was the best day of my life," she said, nestled between the 2 adults she loved most in the world. "The first of many," promised Arthur. "Daddy, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you think the lady in white was watching the party from up there where she is?" Arthur looked at the garden where Lucinda's hydrangeas swayed gently in the night breeze. "I'm sure she was, and I'm sure she was smiling. Because I'm happy. Because she got what she always wanted, to see you loved and safe." Isis nodded satisfied and snuggled closer between them. "Then we're all happy, the whole family." While they watched the stars appear in the upstate New York sky, the 3 knew that they had found something rare and precious, a family formed not by blood or convention, but by choice, love, and the determination to care for each other unconditionally. Isis's 7th birthday marked not only another year of life, but the first anniversary of a family that had chosen each other against all odds, and that would continue growing in love and understanding for the years to come. On the porch of the mansion, surrounded by the scent of night flowers and the soft sound of the sleeping town, father, mother of the heart, and daughter knew that they had found what many people seek their whole lives, a place where they belong completely, where they are loved unconditionally, where they can be exactly who they are. 2 years had passed since Isis's 7th birthday, and the girl who had once lived on the streets of upstate New York had now become one of the brightest students in her school. At 9 years old, she possessed an emotional maturity that impressed teachers and classmates, but maintained the natural sweetness and curiosity of childhood. It was a spring morning when the final revelation arrived at the Davenport mansion, brought by a discovery that no one expected. Isis was organizing her old drawings, an activity that had become a semi-annual ritual, when she found something that intrigued her. Among the papers, yellowed by time, there was a drawing that she did not remember having made. A yellow house with flowered gardens, a tall man on the porch, and a girl running towards him. "Daddy!" she called, coming down the stairs with the drawing in her hands. "Do you remember when I made this?" Arthur examined the paper, immediately recognizing the house. It was the mansion where they lived, drawn with details too precise for someone who had never seen it before. "Isis, this drawing, when do you think you made it?" "I don't know. It was mixed with the other old drawings that Mrs. Monroe brought." She pointed to the lower right corner of the paper. "Look, there's a date here. It seems to be from when I was 4 years old." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. The drawing was dated 2 months before he found Isis in the alley. That is, she had dreamed of her future home and her future family even before she met them. "Valdira!" he called, his voice laden with emotion. When Valdira saw the drawing, her hands trembled visibly. "My God," she whispered. "Isis, do you remember having done this?" "Not very well. But I remember that I dreamed about this house many times when I was little, about the man on the porch, too." Isis looked at Arthur with her big, sincere eyes. "I always thought you seemed familiar when we met." At that moment, Carmen entered the room carrying a box of old papers. "Mr. Davenport, I found more things in the attic that belonged to Mrs. Davenport. Maybe you want to see." Among the papers, there was a diary that no one knew existed, a diary that Lucinda had kept during the last months of her life. With trembling hands, Arthur opened to the first page. "January 15th. I visited Isis today. She showed me a drawing she made of a yellow house. She said that she dreams of this house every night, and that there is a kind man who lives there who one day will take care of her. When I asked what this man was like, she described him perfectly. She described Arthur. How is it possible for a 4-year-old child to dream of things that haven't happened yet?" Arthur continued reading, his voice breaking slightly. "January 20th. Isis continues to dream about the yellow house. Today she told me that the lady in white from her dreams, who I now know is me, always says that she needs to be brave because soon she will find her true family. I'm starting to believe that there are greater forces at work here." Vai. The last entry was devastating. "February 10th. It's my last entry. Isis told me yesterday that the lady in white from her dreams was saying goodbye, but that she shouldn't be sad, because soon she would find her heart daddy. She described again the yellow house, the garden with hydrangeas, even Carmen and Valdira, although she's never seen them. My daughter has a gift that I don't understand, but that gives me peace to leave. She knows the way home." The silence that followed was broken by Isis's soft voice. "I always knew that you were my true family, even before I met you." "How, my dear?" asked Valdira, sitting next to her. "In the dreams. I saw this house. I saw you cooking. I saw Daddy working in the office. I saw Mrs. Estrella taking care of the flowers. I even saw Uncle Edward visiting long before I met him. Arthur knelt before his daughter, marveling once more at the depth of her special connection. "Isis, you never told us about all these dreams. Because I thought everyone dreamed about their families before they found them. I didn't know it was something special." That afternoon, Edward called from New York City with news that perfectly complemented the day's revelations. "Arthur, I have something extraordinary to tell you," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "Marina and I have just adopted a 5-year-old girl. And when she saw the pictures of Isis that we have here at home, she said something amazing." "What did she say?" "She said that she knows Isis from her dreams, that a girl who draws colored birds always appears in her dreams, saying that she will also find a family that loves her." When Arthur told this to Isis, she smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Of course I appeared in her dreams. When you find your true family, you have to help other children find theirs too. How do you do that?" "In the dreams, I show them that it is possible to be happy again, that there are good people in the world who will love them." That night, Arthur tucked Isis into her bed as he did every night for 2 years. But this time, the routine carried a special weight, the understanding that his daughter was even more extraordinary than he imagined. "Isis, can I ask you a question?" "Always, Daddy." "Do you still dream about other children?" "Every day. And in the dreams, I tell them about our family, about how you love me, about how good it is to be home." She paused, her eyes shining in the soft light of the lamp. "I think it's my job to help other children not give up on finding love." "And the lady in white, does she still appear?" "Sometimes. But now she only comes to tell me how proud she is of me and of you." Isis smiled. "She said that you have become the father she always knew you could be." 3 months later, the Davenport mansion received a special visit. Ruth Peterson arrived, accompanied by a committee of social workers and a cameraman, documenting successful adoption cases for a government program. "Isis's story has become a national example," explained Ruth, watching the girl draw in the garden. "We want to show how unconventional families can be as loving and stable as traditional ones." During the filming, Isis spoke with an eloquence that impressed everyone present. "Family is not about having the same eyes or the same blood," she said to the camera. "It's about having the same love. It's about people who choose to stay together when things get tough, who take care of each other when someone is sad, and who celebrate together when someone is happy." "And what would you say to children who are going through what you went through?" asked the interviewer. "That they don't give up. That somewhere there is a family waiting for them, even if they don't know it yet. And that sometimes the best families are those that choose each other, not those we are born into." When the film crew left, Isis ran to the garden where Arthur and Valdira were waiting for her. The afternoon sun gilded Lucinda's hydrangeas, and the birds sang in the trees as if they were celebrating. "Daddy, Mommy Valdira," she said, hugging the two, "thank you for having chosen me." "Thank you for having chosen us too," replied Arthur, his voice choked with emotion. "And thank you for having taught me that love is stronger than any sadness." As the three hugged in the garden of the mansion that had become much more than a house, it had become the heart of an extraordinary family. The birds flew in circles above them, as if they were blessing that union that had been born of pain, but had flourished in the purest love. Isis Davenport, the girl who had once lived on the streets dreaming of a family that would love her, was now not only a beloved daughter, but also a guardian of the dreams of other lost children. In her colored drawings, in her prophetic dreams, in her generous heart, she carried the mission of showing the world that every child deserves love, and that every true family is built on the choice to love unconditionally. And in the garden of the mansion in upstate New York, surrounded by the love of Arthur, Valdira, Carmen, Edward, and the entire extended family that she had chosen, Isis continued drawing birds. No longer birds that dreamed of flying away from the pain, but birds that flew towards home, carrying hope on their colored wings for all the children who still needed to find their way back home. The story that had begun with tears and abandonment ended with laughter and belonging, proving that even the most difficult journeys can lead to the most beautiful destinations when guided by the transformative power of true love.